I'm Elias Brannick, 68 this spring, and I've earned my living by listening to the smallest sounds a thing can make. For 45 years, I tuned escapements and coaxed reluctant gears back into rhythm, the way some men calm horses. The workshop is the front room of my house, a narrow coastal place where fog paws at the windows and gulls argue over nothing. On damp mornings, the air smells like salt and machine oil, the scent of a life that made more sense when everything still ticked. I'd slowed down in recent years, true. My hands ache when the weather turns, and I need a magnifier now for screws I once caught between fingernails. But old customers still bring me their trouble. Grandfather clocks with opinions, marine chronometers that sulk after long winters, heirlooms that sound like family voices when they chime. Work, to me, is patience measured in seconds. It is also the reason I know when someone is lying. The body has a beat, same as a balance wheel. You feel it stutter. My son, Oliver, arrived on a gray afternoon in late autumn when the light went coppery at the edges and you could smell rain deciding whether to fall. He parked his new electric car at a brave angle across my cracked driveway, wearing a jacket that looked expensive in the way of things that aren't meant to last. He stood in the doorway without stepping in. I could hear the small, bright heartbeat of his smartwatch before I looked up. "Dad," he said. He used to call me Pop. The change had arrived, with the car and the jacket. "We need to talk." I set down a carriage clock I'd been coaxing toward life and wiped my fingers on a rag that remembered better years. "Then talk." He glanced at the wall where my wife's photo still hangs. Miriam at 30, eyebrows fierce and laughing at the same time. She'd been gone 7 years, but in certain fogs I swear I hear her in the hall, tapping the baseboard twice to make me look up. Oliver's eyes skittered off the picture like water off brass. "You can't keep living like this," he said, and spread his hands at the crowded room. "No steady work, no plan. It's not safe for you here, anyway. The stairs, the tools. We found you asleep on the work stool last week." "You found me because you let yourself in," I said. And I wasn't asleep. I was listening. He brought paperwork in a branded folder, but he kept it tucked under his arm like a prop he didn't want to show too early. "There's a co-living place on Willow. Modern. Elevator. Meals. It's social, Dad. You'd like it." "I know all the men at Willow," I said. "They wear name tags so they don't forget one another. I'm not that lost yet." He smiled the way a man does when he's already decided how the discussion ends. "It's not about being lost. It's about you having no work. You need purpose." "I have work," I said, "just not a calendar full of it. And my purpose is being here when people knock, that's all." The muscles in his jaw did a little metronome thing. Tick. Tock. Tock. "You don't understand, Dad. The house is a burden. You've got 2 empty rooms. You're sitting on equity. I could list it next week and get you set up. Clean, safe, hassle-free." "You mean you could sell your childhood for a tidy commission?" My tone wasn't kind. It wasn't meant to be. "Someone has to be the adult," he said softly, and that stung worse than the rest. "You're attached to objects. I'm thinking about lives. Yours, especially." Rain finally committed, a soft patter across the porch roof. The clocks in the room answered it like a choir. I watched him resist the urge to tell them to be quiet. Oliver has always hated what he cannot control. "You asked me to leave my house because you can't stand the idea of me staying," I said. "Let's call it what it is." He swallowed. "You taught me precision. I'm just trying to apply it to your future." It should have ended in shouting, but we never had the talent for it. I told him to come back another day. He said he'd be back Friday. When the door closed, the room felt smaller, and the carriage clock in my hands ticked with a stubborn little grin. I put on tea and stood by the workshop window, watching the rain rinse the driveway until the white paint lines on the cracked concrete looked like threads on a torn suit. The thing about clocks is, you come to understand that power never announces itself. It's in the quiet constraints. The pallet stones don't brag. The mainspring doesn't make speeches. They simply hold tension. I slept badly that night, and in the thin hour before dawn, I heard the staircase groan twice. Not the house settling. The house learned me too well to do that. Footsteps. I kept the baseball bat in the umbrella stand, which is a laughable choice for a man who never liked baseball. I took it anyway. On the landing, I smelled cologne that belonged to my son, sharper than I remember. Cedar with something chemical behind it. Downstairs, the workshop door stood a finger's breadth open. Inside, the desk drawers showed the polite disorder of a search done by someone who believes he's still the good guy. I didn't move. If a thief wants to believe he's tidying, he'll miss what matters. He'd left the branded folder on my bench this time, open to a glossy page with mock-ups in my front room as a minimalist maker studio for a co-living brochure. I could almost hear the sales language he'd practiced. Heritage charm, curated craftsmanship, light-filled common spaces. What held me wasn't the brochure. It was the way the small marine clock on the wall had been shifted half an inch to the left. No one notices a half inch unless he is looking for the thing behind it. I set the bat down and lifted the clock free. The screws had been loosened and turned back just shy of tight, the way a cautious hand does when he's testing a panel. Behind the clock was a square cutout I'd made 20 years ago, when Miriam asked for a place that wasn't obvious to keep letters from her sister during a rough patch. The recess was empty. Miriam's letters had been burned, at a request, during a night we thought the past would behave if we treated it with fire. Now the empty cavity had been dusted by someone's recent fingers. I touched the inside edge, and came away with cologne and the faintest smear of graphite, the kind real estate people use when they test sticky locks. Oliver knew the hole existed, which meant Miriam had told him, or he'd watched me once and pretended not to see. Either way, he'd been looking for something he believed that kept secret. Not cash. My son can smell money, and he already knows I don't keep it in walls. Not deeds or wills either. He would never risk his suit for paper. He wanted something smaller, harder to explain, and because he is my son, he believed it belonged to him. The muscles in my wrists twitched, remembering a spring I'd wound too tightly last month, and the sharp snap when the hook let go. I put the clock back in place and locked the workshop door. Miriam kept one place no one else knew about. She had a way with hiding places, the result of growing up in a house where her brothers took anything not nailed down. "Hide little things behind music," she said once, smiling into her tea. "People don't listen there, they only hear." The piano in the back room hasn't been tuned since the funeral. I haven't touched it except to brush dust off the keys when the sun makes them look like teeth. I lifted the fallboard. Dust. Silence. The same 5 chipped ivories from when Oliver drove a toy dump truck into the leg and insisted he'd fixed it with tape. On impulse, I pressed middle C and waited for the wobbling note to finish complaining. Then I pulled the music rack forward and slid my hand under the lip. My fingers struck wood and, beneath it, the brittle scrape of an envelope's edge. I pinched out a slim, oil-stained package wrapped in oiled paper and string. It was smaller than a handkerchief. I hadn't seen it in years. When I peeled the paper open, I found a slender brass key with a clover-shaped ward, the kind locksmiths call a queen's clover. It was Miriam's shape, not mine. Beneath the key lay a folded slip of paper in her hand. "If he ever asks you for this, don't give it. He will not be asking for you." My breath snagged. I could hear the metronome in my head speed up and then steady. Miriam had always moved 3 moves ahead of me and 7 ahead of her son. She had kept small kindnesses and large dangers in the same drawer, like a woman who understands that life and risk share a face. I knew what the key opened. Not a safe. Not a box. It fit the little brass lock on the back of the tall regulator clock that hangs in the town's cafe, the one I donated after Miriam died because listening to it hurt. That clock has a false weight shell. Inside the shell is a velvet pouch with a locket and a micro SD card inside the locket. One of those tech trinkets Oliver used to give Miriam for her stories, which she insisted on recording even when no one asked. She always said, "If I don't put us down somewhere, we'll float away." The card contains voice files. Miriam telling Oliver truths he didn't want about the year he borrowed from a woman with kinder eyes than sense. Miriam coaxing him toward returning what wasn't his. Miriam, at the end, asking him to be a better man than the one he was rehearsing. Oliver brought her flowers and swore he had changed. The locket was her proof that he hadn't. I've had it for years, without listening. out of respect and fear in equal measure. I gave the clock to the cafe because our house felt like a museum where the curator had quit. If Oliver was looking behind the marine clock, Miriam's old note had come due. I wrapped the key again and slid it into my pocket. The weight felt honest. I brewed new tea and drank it standing up, the way tower men do when rain threatens, and you still have to check one more span. Then I called the cafe and asked if the regulator needed oil by chance. The owner, who loves a free service call, told me yes, of course. And when could I come? I said I'd come before lunch, when the soup started and the fishermen were still unsociable. I didn't plan to hand Oliver the key, and I didn't plan to listen to the card. But I knew this much. My son had asked me to leave my house like I was a tenant with poor timing, and then he let himself in at dawn to search for a thing he couldn't name to my face. He was hungry for something more than space. The feud he'd started wasn't about square footage. I set my battered watch on the bench and wound it. The spring caught, then gave, a small sound like an agreement made between stubborn men. I decided to move the locket tonight. I decided to offer Oliver a different future than the one he prepared for me. I decided to give him exactly what he asked for, in a way he didn't expect. I picked up the bat from the umbrella stand and returned it to the porch, where it could pretend to be weathered and harmless. Then I put on my old wool coat with the elbow patches Miriam had sewn, locked the workshop, and started for the cafe through a rain fine enough to taste. Every clock in the house struck the half hour in untidy unison as I closed the door. The cafe sits on the harbor, where the lobster boats nose each other like bored dogs. By late morning, the fog had thinned to gauze, and I could make out the ferry trudging across the inlet like a tired clerk. May Cohen owner, gossip harbor master, queen of chowder met me at the door with a tea towel thrown over one shoulder. "You're early," she said, which in May's grammar means, "What's wrong and how useful can I be about it?" "The regulator's gone sulky," I told her. "It knows when I'm thinking too much." She waved me back toward the clock like a priestess to an altar. The regulator hung in its spot near the hallway, tall and self-contained, walnut case catching the same light Miriam used to claim made her freckles come out. It's funny how wood can carry a person's afterimage, like a fingerprint nobody else sees. "I'll oil the verge and check the suspension," I said. "Might take a bit. May knows me. She pretended to care about soup, which is how she tells me I have time." I pulled the clod from the wall, keeping my body between the case and the room. It's a comfort doing something you can do, blindfolded. The backboard screws turned obediently. The false weight shell slid free. The velvet pouch nestled exactly where I had tucked it years ago, considerate as a sleeping cat. I kept my face in the patient mask, reserved for stubborn machinery, and slipped the pouch into my inner coat pocket. The empty shell got a new occupant, a brass washer, and a folded strip of rag to give it the right heft. I added one more thing, because I'm still my own father's son. I painted a thin seam of layout dye along the inside lip. Blue is a bruise, bright is a bad choice. It dries fast and keeps a secret until fingers tell on themselves. Machinists use it to see high spots on metal. I use it to see people. I cleaned and oiled things that needed neither, then called May over and explained that anyone fiddling with the back panel would smudge blue everywhere. She laughed, soft and mean in the way only an old friend can manage. "You want me to catch a fish," she said. "I'll ring the bell when it bites." "Don't move the clock," I told her. "Make believe it's heavy as debt." On my walk home, I phoned Oliver and said the thing he needed to hear. "I found what you were looking for," I told him. "We should talk this evening." I didn't specify where or when. In our family, vagueness is a lever. It gives the impatient something to push against. I kept moving all afternoon. Men like me don't sit when the wind shifts. I'd put extra padding around Miriam's locket, now actually in my pocket. I sharpened my tiny screwdrivers and set them in a line like little soldiers, a habit I fall into when I want to convince my hands they still know who's in charge. I also left my old wool coat on the peg by the back door, visible, reachable, useless as a hiding place. It is helpful to give a thief the wrong pocket to check. By near dusk, as the first dinner crowd shouldered into May's place, I drifted by with no particular reason to be there. I took the table by the window and faced the hallway where the regulator hangs. Chowder steam curled against the panes like someone breathing. Across the room, a pair of fishermen played gin with the resigned energy of men who know the ocean will always be the house. May moved between the counter and the tables with her tea towel and her mouth set for war. Oliver appeared not long after, alone and dressed like an apology. He scanned the room for me, then looked away, which is what he does when he intends to lie. He ordered something fizzy, pretended to check messages, and then wandered toward the hallway with the bland curiosity of a man considering the framed photographs there. I could see the muscles bunching in his neck like a rope taking strain. He touched the back panel of the regulator, thinking no one saw. The bell May keeps on the counter rang once, then again. Not her hand. The fisherman looked up with the instinct of men trained to alarms. May was already halfway to the hallway, but Oliver had the panel open, and his fingers inside the weight shell. He pulled his hand back quick, as if the clock had bitten. He glanced around, caught my eyes, and in that instant understood it mattered that I was looking. Blue stained his fingers and the cuffs of his clean white shirt. It was the kind of blue that doesn't wash off with a napkin and a promise. May blocked his retreat the way a lighthouse blocks a gull, indifferent and unmovable. "Sir," she said, with all the softness of granite, "that clock is not self-serve." He stammered something about nostalgia, about wanting to see the mechanism his father loved, about how he meant no harm. The words worked fine until he tried to use my name. It stuck in his throat like a fishbone. "You asked me to meet," he said to me, floundering, blue fingers open as if honesty were something a hand could hold. "I thought you'd be here with, my mother's thing." "I asked you to talk," I said. "You decided to steal." "It's a cafe clock," he said quickly. "Public. I wasn't stealing. I was remembering." "You were testing," I said, "and you just found your level." The fishermen, now fully entertained, watched like gulls at a bait barrel. May said nothing. The room did the rest. In places like ours, shame travels faster than any legal letter. Oliver backed toward the door, tried to scrub his fingers with the hem of his jacket, and left a crown of blue across his belly like a sash won at a contest no one wanted to win. "It doesn't matter," he said, mostly to himself. "I have what I need." He didn't. I had the locket in my breast pocket, warm against my shirt, but my son is a man who believes possession is 9/10 and imagination supplies the rest. If he had found only a brass washer and a rag, he would treat them like a treasure because fear would tell him they were. That was Miriam's read on him, and she was rarely wrong. After he fled, May put a cup of tea in front of me and thumped the table with her knuckles.
"You want me to say it?"
She asked.
"I'd rather you didn't."
"He's drowning," she said anyway. "He wants the house because he thinks it will float him." "I know," I said, and watched the harbor grow dark. Some men never learned a good float takes less air than you think. I should have gone home and locked the doors. Instead, I walked a long way. The route that passes the shuttered boardwalk arcade, where the prize lamps hang dusty behind glass. I do that when I need to remember that most trophies are bulbs with good marketing. The porch light at my house was on when I turned in, which is not a thing I do. Laughter climbed out of the living room like smoke. I smelled wine and the anxious citrus of lemon floor cleaner. When I opened the door, a scatter of strangers stood in my workshop with paper cups and eager hands. Someone had leaned a sign against the umbrella stand. "Downsized night. Help Elias transition." Oliver stood at my bench, blue fading to the color of ugly decisions. He carried my carriage clock like a priest with a relic. Next to him, a woman in a real estate blazer. Kayla. I remembered from a Christmas where everyone said network too many times, beamed at the crowd. "Dad," Oliver said, with the bright faith of a magician, certain the rabbit is in the hat. We started sorting. People are here to help. Community, you know. We'll get you settled by the weekend. You won't have to lift a finger. He lifted the clock instead. You can choose what matters. The rest goes to good homes. A neighbor I barely know turned over my micrometer like a toy. Another man tested the hinge on my parts cabinet, as if checking a jaw. Behind them, two college kids lolled near the piano. one hand already on the fallboard. The room had been staged like an open house, except the merchandise was my life. "Stop," I said, and my voice came out wrong, too soft for the number of bodies. No one heard. "You cannot speak into a storm. You have to change the wind." Kayla tapped a spoon to a glass. The room tilted its ear. "One special item tonight," she said, smiling through me to the people whose hands she imagined signing lines later. "A keepsake from Miriam Brannick." She paused, savoring the name. A locket with a family recording inside. A living memory, ready to be shared with those who loved her. My heart knocked twice against my ribs in a rhythm I didn't recognize. Oliver lifted something from his pocket with a conjurer's flair. It was small and round, brass winking in the lamplight. I had not felt a lift against my breast. I had not sensed a hand near my coat. But there it was between his stained fingers. Not my locket. A twin. He had made a copy. Or he had another from a place I didn't know. And inside it, if he believed his own story was the voice he feared and wanted, packaged for an audience I would not have invited. "Let's play it for everyone," Kayla said, wagging her phone near the Bluetooth speaker on the shelf. "Let's hear what Miriam wanted us to hear." Oliver looked at me over the rims of their expectation. There was a dare in his stare, and something else, a plea he did not intend. The room breathed in. I saw my micrometer still turning in the neighbor's hand. The college kid about to lay both palms on the piano keys. The bat at the umbrella stand with its stupid gumshoe posture. My own workshop shrunk into a party trick. I put my hand in my coat and closed my fingers around the real locket, warm as a cup of tea. I stepped forward, coat still on, and felt the weight of the real locket resting against my palm. The chatter in the room dimmed the way wind drops before a change in weather. Oliver tilted the brass twin in his hand so the crowd could admire it, then passed it to Kayla like he'd just handed her the crown of Street George. "Let's hear her," she said, all bright teeth and theater. The Bluetooth speaker chirped, waiting for a voice that wouldn't come. I reached into my coat and drew the real locket, holding it so the lamplight found the small dent in its edge. The dent was from a day Miriam had dropped it between the planks of the pier, laughing as I nearly went headfirst trying to fish it out. Oliver knew the dent. I saw him recognize it before he looked away. "That's not the same one," I said, calm as I'd tell a man his watch was running slow. "What you've got is a copy. No voice inside, just an empty shell." A murmur moved through the room. Kayla froze with her phone half raised. "Go on," I told her. "Open it." She thumbed the clasp. Inside was nothing but a folded scrap of paper. She glanced at Oliver, then unfolded it. The note was in my blocky machinist's hand. "You don't get her voice this way." The laugh that rippled through the room wasn't mean. It was worse. It was pity wearing a grin. Oliver's face drained of everything but the blue smear still ghosting his fingers. "You went to the cafe for that clock," I said, still in the tone of a man explaining a repair. "You walked into my house at dawn to hunt behind my walls. And you brought strangers here to sift my life like a parts bin. But you don't know the first thing about what she trusted me to keep." He set the fake locket down on the bench as if it might burn him. "I just wanted." "You wanted control," I said. "Same as when you told me to leave my house. Same as tonight." The college kid at the piano dropped his hands in his lap. The neighbor set my micrometer back on the bench without meeting my eye. Even Kayla began gathering her things. The deal scent gone from the air. I turned the real locket over in my fingers. "This stays with me until I decide what to do with it," I said. That was Miriam's condition, and unlike some people in this room, I keep my word. Oliver's mouth worked once, twice. Whatever argument he'd rehearsed had gone brittle. "You think you've won," he said finally. "No," I said. "I think I've kept you from losing more than you already have." That landed somewhere behind his eyes. He looked at me for a long moment, then pushed past the others toward the door. No one stopped him. The crowd thinned in his wake, leaving the smell of wine and lemon cleaner and the faint oil of my workshop. When the last of them had gone, I locked the door and walked to the back room. The piano waited, its chipped ivories grinning in the low light. I lifted the fallboard and set the locket inside. behind the music rack where Miriam had hidden the key all those years ago. Then I closed it gently, the way you close a watch case, and turned off the lamp. Outside, the tide was coming in. The harbor buoys nodded in the dark, each with its own slow blink. I stepped onto the porch, bat leaning where it always had, and listened to the faint chorus of the clocks inside, all ticking in their stubborn, slightly uneven way. Miriam used to say a good clock doesn't care who's watching. It just keeps its beat. Tonight, I understood that better than I ever had. Some things you keep not to win, but to make sure they can't be used to hurt what's left. The rain started again, fine enough to taste, as I turned the locket's dent over once more in my mind and let it tick quietly into the night.